Brittany shoved the red folder against my chest hard enough for its sharp edge to catch beneath my collarbone. The adhesive from the quarantine labels hung heavy in the packing area, bitter and chemical beneath the colder smell of the factory air. Hundreds of white PulseSure cartons sat motionless on pallets, each one crossed with a bright orange sticker. The forklifts had been parked in the middle of their lanes as if someone had ordered the entire building to stop breathing. Above the loading doors, the production screen displayed 4 words in red. Carebridge rollout suspended. My sister still wore her new wedding ring. Her mascara had collected in dark shadows beneath her eyes, and the hand gripping the folder would not stay still. "Please," she said. "Mom and Dad can't find out what happened to the 100 million. I opened the folder. The metal fastener scraped under my thumb. The last page was an authorization to release the quarantined PulseSure units for shipment. The approval date was April 18th, the night of Brittany's wedding. The electronic signature at the bottom was mine, Rachel Whitmore, Director of Quality. The title I had held until my sister fired me in front of 200 guests. I read the page twice, then looked past her at the sealed pallets. How many left the building? That isn't what I asked. It is the only question that matters right now. Her lips tightened. Dad said you already approved the release. I didn't. He showed me the record. I closed the folder and handed it back without touching the pen clipped inside. Then someone used my name. Brittany stepped between me and the exit. You can fix this. No, I can help determine what happened. Those are not the same thing. She lowered her voice. Just sign the last page. We can correct the date later. I looked at my signature again. 1 week earlier, at the exact time that approval had been created, I had been standing beside her champagne with my company badge lying on the table between us. Before I tell you how my sister became chief executive officer at her own wedding and lost control of a $100 million deal 7 days later, I hope you're doing well. Stay with me to see what happened next. And subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. 1 week earlier, I arrived at Whitmore Remote Care before 7 in the morning wearing jeans, a blouse, and the shoes I planned to change out of before the ceremony. Dana Cho was waiting inside the environmental test room, with her hair twisted into a loose knot and 3 empty coffee cups lined beside the keyboard. She was 29, one of our best validation engineers, and normally careful enough to speak in complete paragraphs even during a crisis. That morning, she pointed at the monitor and said, "It failed again." The PulseSure home monitor had been designed for older patients and people recovering at home. It collected heart rate data and sent it to a central monitoring service. The unit on the test bench still had power. Its sensor light was steady. A green status icon glowed on the casing. On Dana's second screen, the clinical data had stopped. When? I asked. 6 minutes after the switch to backup power, the communications module is still sending Keep Alive packets, so the server thinks the unit is connected. But it isn't sending new heart rate data. And the missing data alarm? Never triggered. Every Keep Alive packet resets the timer. The green light made the failure worse. A patient looking at that device would believe someone was still listening. Run it again with the original module, I said. Save the raw logs from both tests. No screenshots as substitutes. I want the source files. Dana nodded, but I was already opening the quality system on my laptop. I placed the affected lot on formal quarantine, blocked shipment in the inventory system, opened a corrective action file, and notified Regulatory Counsel that we needed an immediate reportability assessment. I copied the audit committee because the Carebridge rollout was less than 2 weeks away, and the lot was part of the first scheduled shipment. Dana watched me type. Are we stopping the contract? We're stopping these units until we know whether the failure can happen outside this room. That sounds like the same thing. It isn't. I kept my eyes on the screen. Document everything. I heard how cold that sounded. But I did not explain more. At the time, I told myself I was protecting her from pressure she did not need. The truth was less flattering. I had spent years believing information became safer when I held it tightly. My father entered before Dana could respond. Gerald Whitmore had founded the company in our garage nearly 3 decades earlier. At 64, he still moved through the factory, as if every machine had been built to answer directly to him. "What did you block?" he asked. "The first Carebridge lot." His gaze shifted to the green light on the device. "It looks operational. It has power. It is not transmitting new clinical data. How many units failed? 3 tests on this configuration. Out of how many thousands we have produced? That is not the correct comparison. It is the comparison the bank will make when this delay puts us outside our loan covenant. I turned my laptop toward him. If you want the quarantine removed, instruct me in writing and state that you are overriding the quality decision before the investigation is complete. He stared at the message field but did not touch the keyboard. You enjoy making people afraid of their own decisions, he said. No, I require them to own those decisions. His jaw tightened. Your sister understands that a company cannot survive if every unusual reading becomes a catastrophe. My sister runs sales. This is not a sales judgment. He left without giving me the written order. By noon, I was at the wedding venue in Dublin, changing in a private room while my mother supervised florists, photographers, and the placement of the Whitmore Family Foundation display near the reception hall. Marilyn Whitmore entered without knocking. She wore a pale silver dress and the expression she used whenever she wanted cruelty to sound like concern. Your father told me you created another problem this morning. I documented a product failure. Today is not about your work. The failure did not check Brittany's wedding calendar. She closed the door behind her. Your sister has waited her entire life for one day when she was not standing in your shadow. Do not take that from her. I fastened one earring and met her eyes in the mirror. I am not discussing the product during the ceremony or during the reception. If someone tries to release the quarantined lot, I will respond. My mother sighed, as if I had disappointed her by refusing to lie more gracefully. You always need to be the difficult daughter. A few minutes later, Brittany entered in her wedding gown. She looked beautiful, but the muscles around her mouth were rigid. Are you planning to ruin this for me? She asked. No. Dad says you are trying to delay the Carebridge launch. The lot is quarantined pending investigation. You could have waited until Monday. Patients will use the same devices on Monday. Her eyes hardened. You cannot stand that they finally trust me with something important. I should have told her exactly what Dana had found. I should have made her repeat the technical risk back to me until I knew she understood it. Instead, I said, the quarantine stays in place. That was accurate. It was also the kind of answer that had allowed my parents to describe me as controlling for years. The ceremony passed without incident. During the reception, employees sat beside relatives, investors shared tables with family friends, and a photographer moved through the room collecting the polished images my mother wanted attached to the company's next chapter. After dinner, my father stood and raised his champagne glass. I have spent almost 30 years building Whitmore Remote Care, he began. Tonight, I am proud to announce the leader who will carry it forward. Brittany looked surprised, but not surprised enough. The board has approved Brittany as our new Chief Executive Officer, effective Monday morning. Applause broke across the room. Then, my father looked directly at me. To our new CEO, he said. Not the useless daughter who held us back. The applause died unevenly. A few guests lowered their glasses. Others watched me with the eager discomfort people mistake for sympathy when they are relieved the humiliation belongs to someone else. I did not stand. I did not give my father the scene he had prepared me to perform. Brittany reached for the microphone. As my first decision, she said, Rachel, you're fired. Your access ends tonight. My mother watched from beside the cake, calm and satisfied. That was when I understood the announcement had not been an impulsive wedding surprise. The decision had already been approved. The microphone was only there to make my removal public. I looked at Brittany. Did you read the quarantine report? She lifted her chin. I read Dad's summary. That is not what I asked. I am the CEO now. I do not need you questioning every decision I make. I unfastened my company badge from the inside of my evening jacket and placed it beside her champagne flute. Firing me does not cancel a quarantine already entered into the quality system, I said. If you release that lot without a completed review, the record will show who made the decision. The photographer's camera clicked as Brittany stared at the badge. I picked up my purse and walked out before my parents could turn the room into another trial about my loyalty. Near the service corridor, the PulseSure demo unit on the foundation display was still glowing green. A venue employee stood beside it, frowning at the tablet that should have shown a live stream of sample heart rate data. The service power went out almost an hour ago, he told me. It switched to the battery, but the screen stopped updating. The device casing felt warmer than it should have. I later learned it had spent most of the afternoon inside a sealed transport van under an unusually warm April sun. At that moment, I only knew the green light was on and the data was not moving. I photographed the display, recorded the time, and asked the employee not to reset the unit. In the parking lot, still wearing my formal dress, I sent a written notice confirming that I had been terminated, that the quarantine and corrective action remained active, and that all quality records, access logs, complaint data, and test files had to be preserved. I also documented what I had observed on the demo unit. Then I called an employment attorney and an independent governance advisor. I did not call my parents. I had spent enough years trying to explain boundaries to people who only respected them when another authority enforced them. 7 days later, I stood in the quarantined packing area with Brittany's red folder in my hands. I tapped the approval timestamp. I was standing beside your champagne when this was approved. Brittany's face lost what little color it had left. Then someone used your name after I fired you. The morning after my sister fired me at her wedding, I woke before sunrise and reached for a phone that no longer belonged to the person I had been the day before. My company email was gone. The quality dashboard no longer loaded. The secure application I had used every morning for 15 years returned a gray screen with a single line telling me my account had been disabled. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and rain tapping against the living room window. My green evening dress hung over the back of a chair. I had dropped it there after midnight, along with the shoes that had carried me out of the reception while 200 people pretended not to stare. I did not allow myself to sit there replaying the toast. Instead, I opened my personal laptop and created a folder. I saved the termination notice sent by Human Resources at 11:43 the night before. I saved my employment agreement, the company policy governing quality decisions, the email confirming the quarantine, and the message I had sent from the parking lot demanding that all records be preserved. I wrote down the exact time I had placed my badge beside Brittany's champagne. Memory became less reliable when people began arguing about what had happened. A written timeline did not care who cried louder. My mother texted at 7:15. Your father did not sleep. What you did to Brittany was cruel. Apologize before this damages the family beyond repair. I read the message twice. She had watched my father call me useless in front of employees, investors, and relatives. She had watched Brittany fire me with a microphone in her hand. Somehow, my refusal to beg had become the injury everyone needed me to repair. I did not defend myself. I replied that all communication concerning my termination, the Pulse Shore quarantine, or company records, needed to go through my attorney and the audit committee. 3 dots appeared beneath her name. They vanished without another message. At 8:12, Dana called from her personal number. She did not say hello. The quarantine is gone. I stood so quickly that my knee struck the underside of the table. Gone how? The lot is active again. I checked before anyone else arrived. Yesterday it showed blocked inventory. This morning it says available for release. Did you take screenshots? A pause followed. I took pictures with my phone. Do not send them to me. What? Do not forward company records to anyone unless a lawyer or the independent reporting channel instructs you to. Do not download files. Do not copy customer information. Write down what you personally observed, including the time, the screen you were using, and who was present. Rachel, they erased your quarantine. They changed its status. The original action should still exist in the audit trail. What if it doesn't? Then the absence becomes evidence too. Her breathing sounded uneven. I pictured her in the validation room, shoulders lifted, one hand pressed against the door as if Gerald might enter at any moment. I need you to listen carefully, I said. Do not confront anyone. Do not accuse Brittany. Do not tell your supervisor you called me. Use the independent ethics line. Ask for counsel outside the reporting chain. You make that sound easy. I know it isn't. No, you don't. Her voice sharpened. You were the director. You could challenge him. I have rent, student loans, and health insurance tied to this job. I closed my eyes for a moment. You're right. The words felt unfamiliar in my mouth. Not because I believed I was never wrong, but because I had trained myself to answer fear with instructions. Dana continued before I could say more. Why didn't you tell me the failure could reach patients? I told you to preserve the raw data. That is not the same thing. No, I said. It isn't. I had thought withholding the larger conflict protected her. In reality, it left her standing inside danger without understanding its shape. I should have explained more, I said. But none of this is your fault. Document what you saw and contact the independent channel, then go home if you feel unsafe. What are you going to do? Make sure they cannot pretend the quarantine never existed. After we ended the call, I contacted my attorney. She instructed me not to communicate directly with current employees unless they reached out voluntarily, and not to accept any internal documents outside formal channels. Then she forwarded my preservation notice to the audit committee's outside advisor. By 10 that morning, my father had sent an email to the entire company. A former colleague forwarded it to me from his personal account without comment. Gerald wrote that I had left Whitmore Remote Care after a disagreement over strategic direction. He thanked me for my years of service and described Brittany's appointment as a planned transition into a new era of growth. There was no mention of the wedding, no mention of my termination, no mention of the quarantined lot, no mention of the product failure. The message ended by asking employees not to engage with rumors spread by individuals who no longer had access to complete company information. That final phrase was written for me. My mother posted wedding photographs before noon. The first showed Brittany and Evan beneath an arch of white flowers. The second showed my parents raising their glasses beside the new chief executive officer. The third showed Brittany smiling with the microphone in her hand. I appeared in the corner of that picture, seated and expressionless. The caption praised family, continuity, and leadership built on trust. Marilyn had always understood that whoever supplied the first version of a story often controlled every version that followed. At 1:30, a man named Warren Pierce called me. Warren had worked at Whitmore Remote Care for 19 years. He had taught me how to read our first manufacturing reports when I was still in college. I expected him to ask whether I was all right. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "People are saying you blocked CareBridge because the board chose Brittany." "Who is saying that?" "I'm asking you." "No, you're repeating it." He exhaled. "Gerald says the technical concern was already addressed." "Did he show you the test data?" "That isn't my department." "Then why have you decided who is right?" His silence answered before he did. "I haven't decided anything," he said. "I just need to know whether the company is about to lose the biggest contract we have ever signed because two sisters cannot work together." My hand tightened around the phone. A week earlier, I would have ended the conversation. I would have assumed that the quarantine record, the raw logs, and the corrective action file would eventually speak for me. But Gerald had already turned a product failure into family jealousy because I had left him an empty space where my explanation should have been. "The disagreement was not about the CEO position," I said. "I found a device failure. I issued a formal quarantine. I was fired before the investigation was completed." Warren went quiet again. "Is anyone in danger?" he asked. "I do not yet know the full scope." "That sounds like lawyer language." "It is accurate language." He thanked me without warmth and ended the call. I placed the phone on the table and understood something I should have learned years earlier. Records did not speak for themselves. People interpreted them, buried them, renamed them, or surrounded them with enough noise that no one looked closely. That afternoon, my attorney called to say CareBridge wanted to speak with me. The request came through formal counsel, not through a secret number or a personal favor. That distinction mattered. Elias Brooks, CareBridge's Director of Clinical Safety, would join with one of their regulatory attorneys. My attorney would remain on the line. Elias's voice was calm and precise. "Miss Whitmore, I need to establish what controls were active when your employment ended." I opened my timeline. The affected lot was under formal quarantine. A corrective action file had been opened. The complaint and regulatory review were pending. Shipment required a new quality approval after the failure investigation. Was that communicated in writing? Yes. To whom? Gerald Whitmore, Operations, Regulatory Counsel, the Audit Committee, and the Validation Team. Did you authorize anyone to remove the quarantine? No. Did you close the corrective action? No. Did you conclude the risk was acceptable? No. My attorney stopped me before I offered more. Elias continued. We are reviewing an incident report involving a PulseSure unit. I cannot provide identifiable patient information. I also cannot tell you who brought the matter to our attention. I am not asking for a name. Good. I need the reference numbers for your internal quarantine and corrective action. I gave him the numbers from my saved confirmation. He read them back carefully. We will request the controlled records through company counsel, he said. Do you possess copies? I have my lawful employment records, the written confirmation of my actions, and a working index. I do not have patient data or controlled originals. That was the correct answer. His tone did not soften, but I heard the meaning beneath it. He had expected someone in my position to arrive carrying stolen files and anger. I need to know whether the reported incident matches what you saw in testing, I said. After a brief consultation with his attorney, Elias provided a de-identified summary. An older woman had been using PulseSure at home while recovering from a cardiac procedure. A neighborhood power interruption had forced the unit onto backup power. The room had become unusually warm because the air conditioning shut down. The device continued sending status packets. The central dashboard showed it as connected. The green light at the patient's home remained on, but no new clinical data arrived for several hours. The woman's daughter called because her mother sounded confused. She drove over, found her in distress, and took her to the hospital. The patient received treatment and recovered. No one at the monitoring center had received an offline alert because each status packet reset the missing data timer. It was the same failure Dana and I had watched in the test room. Only this time, there had been a woman on the other end. For several seconds, I could hear nothing except the rain against my window. Has the device been preserved? I asked. Yes. Preserve the charger, the backup battery, and the communications log with it. Record the room temperature if the family has a thermostat history. Do not allow anyone to update the firmware. We have already issued those instructions. Good. Elias paused. Our regulatory council is evaluating whether the complaint meets serious injury reporting criteria and when the manufacturer became aware. We are also preserving the distribution records. The serial number needs to be compared against the quarantined lot. That is one reason we contacted you. I did not ask whether the company had already seen the complaint. His wording told me enough. CareBridge was building its own timeline because it did not trust ours. When the call ended, I stood at the kitchen sink and watched rainwater move down the glass in crooked lines. A patient had reached a hospital because her daughter called at the right time. That was not a safety system. That was luck. I wanted to call Brittany and tell her exactly what the green light had hidden. I wanted to ask whether the chief executive officer had read the report yet, or whether she was still relying on Gerald's summary. My attorney told me not to contact her. For once, I listened. On Monday morning, I reviewed the materials I was legally permitted to retain. The red folder I had carried to the wedding had not contained controlled originals. It was a working copy prepared for the audit committee meeting that had been scheduled for the following week. My attorney had received a matching copy before my termination. I checked the table of contents against the pages in her file. One page was missing. It listed the serial numbers from the failed validation group and linked them to the prototype unit used for internal demonstrations. The controlled original should still have existed inside the electronic quality system, but I could no longer see it. I remembered the last time I had touched the printed page. It had been lying beside the PulseSure sample Dana was preparing for the foundation display at Brittany's wedding. Someone from events had needed the unit's identifying information to make a display card. I called Dana. Her phone went directly to voicemail. I waited 10 minutes and tried again. The same recorded message answered. I emailed the independent ethics address and asked that counsel confirm whether Dana was safe and represented. I did not include the missing page or the patient incident. I only said she had contacted me about a quality record and had since become unreachable. An hour later, I opened the employee directory that Human Resources had attached to my separation package. The file had been generated Sunday night. Dana's name remained on the engineering page, but the status beside it had changed. Inactive. I checked the date. Her access had been disabled less than 12 hours after she called me. I stared at the word until the letters lost their shape. The missing serial number page could connect the failed test unit, the wedding display, and the device that had reached the field. Dana was the last person I knew had handled it. Now her account was gone, her phone was off, and the company had already begun telling employees that I was the threat. The only engineer who could prove what I had seen was gone before I could ask her who had taken the missing page. For 3 days, I heard nothing from Dana. Her personal phone remained off. Her company account had been disabled, and the independent ethics office would only confirm that my message had been received. They would not tell me whether she had resigned, been suspended, or hired an attorney. I respected the boundary, even though every unanswered question pushed at me. The missing serial number page still bothered me. So did the speed with which the company had erased Dana from its systems. I had no proof that the two things were connected. And I refused to turn suspicion into fact simply because my parents had done that to me. On Wednesday, April 22nd, my attorney informed me that the audit committee had appointed outside counsel to preserve quality and access records. That was progress. But it did not restore the quarantine or tell me how many PulseSure units had left the building. By Friday evening, I had organized everything I legally possessed into a timeline. The original quarantine confirmation, the corrective action number, my preservation notice, the photograph of my badge beside Brittany's champagne, the photograph of the green demo unit at the reception, the time I left the venue, the time my company access was disabled. I knew records could be manipulated, but people usually changed only the part of a story they thought mattered. They forgot that every alteration created a second timeline. At 7:32 on Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after the wedding, my attorney called. "Cairbridge froze the rollout 15 minutes ago," she said. I sat upright in bed. Froze or terminated? Froze. All scheduled deliveries and payments are suspended pending investigation. She forwarded the notice while we spoke. The Cairbridge agreement was often described inside Whitmore as a $100 million deal, but that number represented the projected value of 5 years of distribution. No one had deposited $100 million into an account. Cairbridge paid as units passed inspection, shipped, and entered service. Freezing the rollout meant no additional deliveries and no new payments. It also meant the company's expansion loan, supplier commitments, and payroll projections were suddenly resting on revenue that might never arrive. Cairbridge demanded the complete lot history, the approval chain, the preliminary corrective action plan, and written confirmation that the company was evaluating its reporting obligations to the Food and Drug Administration. The final paragraph was more direct. If Cairbridge found evidence that Whitmore had intentionally concealed the defect, altered complaint data, or failed to meet regulatory duties, it reserved the right to terminate the agreement. Who received this? I asked. Brittany, Gerald, Marilyn, company counsel, the board, the lender, and outside audit counsel. We received it because it references your quarantine and termination. Has anyone contacted regulatory counsel? Not that we know. My phone buzzed while she was still speaking. Brittany. I looked at her name and felt something I did not like admitting. A small part of me wanted to let it ring. She had held a microphone in her hand while she fired me. Now the position she had accepted as a prize had become a locked room, and she had finally discovered there was no one inside it who intended to protect her. I answered because patients were involved, not because she was my sister. Her breathing came through before her voice. Rachel, please. What happened? Cairbridge suspended everything. I know. How could you already know? My attorney was copied through outside counsel. She made a frustrated sound. Of course you have an attorney. You fired me in public while a quarantined product was waiting for review. Hiring one was not an overreaction. I didn't call to fight. Then tell me how many devices left the warehouse. Silence followed. Brittany. 240. My feet touched the floor. How many reached patients? 18 were installed through the pilot program. Most of the rest are still at Cairbridge distribution sites. Have all 18 been located? They're working on it. Who is working on it? Operations. That is not enough. Has regulatory counsel opened an MDR assessment? I don't know what that means. I pressed my fingers against my forehead. It means determining whether the incident and the malfunction must be reported to the FDA. Did anyone provide counsel with the complete complaint history? Dad said there was only one hospital incident. That was not my question. Her breathing changed. I heard the faint scrape of a chair and imagined her inside the office my father had once promised would be mine if I proved I could put the company before myself. There were other connectivity complaints, she admitted. Customer service classified them as setup problems. Who made that decision? I don't know. You are the CEO. I have been CEO for 5 days. You used the title after 5 minutes when you fired me. She began crying then, but quietly, as if even alone she did not want anyone to hear her lose control. Our honeymoon is postponed, Evan is furious, Mom keeps telling him this will be over by next week, and Dad says CareBridge is bluffing. I have a board call at 9. Please, Mom and Dad can't find out what happened to the $100 million. The money did not disappear. The contract was frozen because your company shipped units that were under quarantine. Your company too. Not since last Saturday. You can fix this. No. I can help determine the risk and build a legitimate corrective plan. I will not erase what happened. I have a form. My attention sharpened. What form? A risk acceptance. Dad says you completed most of it before the wedding. It only needs your signature. What date is on it? She did not answer. What date, Brittany? April 18th. The day of the wedding. The day I had expressly refused to approve the lot. Do not sign anything, I said. Do not change that document. Do not email it to me from your personal account. Preserve it exactly as it is. I need you here. You need independent counsel and a regulatory team that has been given the complete data. I need my sister. The sentence might have moved me years earlier. Back then, those words always meant I was expected to step between Brittany and whatever consequence she had created. I can be your sister without becoming your shield, I said. A door opened on her end of the call. My father's voice came through clearly. Is she on the phone? Brittany hesitated, then switched to speaker. Gerald did not greet me. This has gone far enough, he said. Come to the office. Send a written invitation through the audit committee. We do not need a committee to invite my daughter into my company. You needed a board vote to appoint Brittany. You needed human resources to terminate me. You can use formal procedure now, too. My mother joined him. Rachel, your father has barely slept. Brittany's marriage is already under strain, and more than 200 employees are frightened. This is not the time to punish everyone because your feelings were hurt. My feelings did not quarantine the lot. Your judgment did. Yes, that was my job. Gerald took over again. The failure occurred under an artificial combination of heat and backup power. No responsible executive would destroy a company over an edge case. A patient was hospitalized. She recovered. That does not make the system safe. We are not asking you to say it was perfect. We are asking you to confirm the risk was within an acceptable range while we finish the correction. You are asking me to sign a document dated before I was fired. We can correct the administrative details later. There is nothing administrative about creating a false approval. My mother lowered her voice. If the contract collapses, people will lose their homes. Evan may leave your sister before their marriage even begins. Your father could lose everything he built. Are you prepared to live with that? That depends on who caused it. You always have to be right. No, I have to be accurate. Gerald offered to restore my position, salary, and severance. He said the wedding announcement had been necessary to give Brittany credibility. He claimed the public firing had only been a communication decision, and that everyone would understand if I returned as a consultant. He spoke as if humiliation became harmless when renamed strategy. I will not return under you or Brittany, I said. I will not sign anything retroactively. I will not accept verbal assurances. I will participate only if the audit committee issues a written invitation. My attorney is present, CareBridge has an observer, and I receive read-only access to the relevant records. That is absurd, Gerald said. It is the minimum. You are using this crisis to seize control. I am preventing the people who created the crisis from controlling the evidence. Brittany whispered my name, but I did not change the conditions. At 8:26, outside audit counsel emailed the formal invitation. By 9, Elias had confirmed that he would attend remotely as CareBridge's safety representative. My attorney arranged to meet me at the factory entrance. The letter specified that I was entering as an external advisor to the audit committee, not as an employee and not under the authority of any family member. I changed into a dark suit and drove from Worthington to Westerville through light Saturday traffic. The building looked unchanged from the outside. The same silver Whitmore logo stood above the entrance. The same flag snapped against the pole near the parking lot. Yet, the security officer did not wave me through as he had every weekday for 15 years. He printed a visitor badge. The temporary card felt light and cheap against my jacket. My old badge had opened laboratories, quality archives, executive offices, and every controlled area in the building. This one allowed me to enter a conference room and the packing floor only while escorted. Several employees watched as I passed. Some looked away. One gave me a small nod. Warren Pierce stood beside the production board with his arms folded, but he did not approach. Brittany met us outside the executive conference room. She wore the same blue blouse I had seen in company photographs from her first day as CEO, but now it was wrinkled at the elbows and untucked slightly at the back. She carried the red working folder. When she pushed it toward me, we reached the moment she and I had already replayed in different ways for the rest of that morning. I opened to the release authorization. My electronic signature appeared beneath the risk statement. The date was April 18th. The approval time was 8:47 in the evening. "I was still at your reception," I said. "Dad said you approved it before you walked out." "This timestamp says otherwise." The room contained my attorney, outside audit counsel, company counsel, the IT director, Brittany, and Gerald. Marilyn remained near the far end of the table, speaking softly with the head of communications. Elias appeared on the wall screen. I turned to Brittany. "You said 240 units left?" "When?" "Monday afternoon." "Who removed the quarantine?" "Operations processed the release." "On whose authority?" She glanced toward Gerald. He answered for her. "The incoming CEO determined the hold was unnecessarily broad." "Did she review the raw validation data?" "She reviewed the executive summary." "Did the summary state that the device could appear connected while transmitting no new clinical data?" "It described a temporary communications interruption." Elias leaned closer to his camera. "That wording is materially incomplete." Gerald ignored him. We moved to the packing floor. The original quarantine order covered 720 units. 480 remained behind orange labels. The empty spaces between pallets made the missing quantity visible without a spreadsheet. I walked the rows, checking lot codes without touching the cartons. A week earlier, I had placed all 720 under hold because we did not know which modules had been exposed to the same production conditions. Now, 240 were outside our direct control. That was not an abstract contract problem. It was a recovery list. Back in the conference room, the IT director opened the release record in read-only mode. My name appeared in the approver field. My employee identification number appeared beneath it. The digital certificate matched the one previously assigned to my account. "Show the authentication event," I said. He pulled up the available log. The record showed successful approval at 8:47 on the night of the wedding. "Source device?" I asked. The field displayed a generic internal network address. "That is not the raw event," I said. The IT director shifted in his seat. The logs were normalized during the executive access transition. My attorney looked at him. Define. Normalized. User records were consolidated after accounts were disabled and reassigned. "Who ordered that?" outside counsel asked. "Mr. Whitmore requested that we complete the transition before Monday." Gerald placed both hands on the table. "We were changing executive leadership. Access had to be cleaned up. Cleaning up access does not require altering the presentation of historical authentication records," I said. "No records were altered," the IT director replied quickly. The working display was standardized. The original backups remain under retention policy. "Immutable backups?" I asked. He hesitated. "Yes." "Open them." Company counsel objected. Outside audit counsel overruled him under the preservation mandate. While the backup loaded, I placed my phone records, attorney-certified wedding photographs, and the venue's security confirmation beside the release form. At 8:47, the photographer had captured Brittany holding the microphone while my badge lay beside her champagne. The venue camera showed me leaving the ballroom several minutes later. My phone had not connected to the Whitmore network. My laptop was shut down at my apartment. No remote authentication request had reached either device. Brittany stared at the photographs. Dad told me you signed before you left. Gerald did not look at her. I told you the approval was in the system. That is not the same thing. It was enough to continue operations. No, I said. It was enough to make you believe someone else had accepted the risk. The IT director finally found the preserved access record. The raw log showed that my digital approval certificate had been disabled after my termination notice was processed. At 6:42 Monday morning, it had been activated again through an administrator account. The certificate had then been used to approve the release. My attorney asked the IT director to preserve the screen and export the record directly to outside counsel. Which administrator restored it? I asked. He opened the next field. The request had been submitted under an IT service credential, but the source machine was identified by its asset number, Everweasy X0Kate. I knew the code before he searched the equipment register. For 15 years, I had signed off on access maps, disaster recovery plans, and controlled system inventories. Executive devices were easy to recognize because there were so few of them. The IT director entered the number. The equipment assignment appeared on the screen. Executive Office 4, Gerald Whitmore. No one spoke. The log did not prove who had been sitting in the chair. It did not prove whose hand had touched the keyboard. But it proved my certificate had not revived itself, and it proved the request had come from the office of the man who had spent the entire morning insisting I had approved the release before I left. I looked across the table at my father. For the first time since the wedding, he had no new version of the story ready. The raw access log did not tell us who had been sitting behind my father's desk, but it destroyed the first version of his story. My approval certificate had been disabled after I was fired, restored through an administrator account at 6:42 Monday morning, and used to release the quarantined lot 2 hours later. The request originated from the computer assigned to Gerald Whitmore's executive office. My father stared at the screen and called it a routine transition. Then show us the transition request, I said. The IT director, Martin Vale, searched the preserved service records while outside counsel watched. Martin had worked for my father for 11 years. Sweat had darkened the collar of his shirt, but he kept his voice measured. The ticket says Mr. Whitmore requested continuity of access for unfinished executive approvals. Which approvals? It doesn't specify. Who restored my certificate? One of my administrators processed the ticket. Did that administrator know I had refused to approve the PulseSure release? I don't know. Did you? Martin looked at Gerald before answering. I knew the lot was on hold. I did not know the technical reason. Gerald leaned back in his chair. This is becoming theater. We had a leadership change. Systems had to remain operational. Elias's face remained still on the conference room screen. Restoring a former quality director's digital certificate is not the same as keeping a system operational. No patient record was altered, Gerald said. We are discussing a product release authorization, Elias replied. That is not a minor administrative function. My father turned toward me. You trained these people to treat every technical detail like a criminal investigation. No, Kenai said. I trained them to preserve records so no one could rewrite a decision after the outcome was known. Outside counsel instructed Martin to export the original logs, ticket history, administrator activity, and device records to a protected repository. My father objected until the investor directors reminded him that the preservation order had already been approved. The meeting ended without anyone admitting who had used my certificate. That did not mean we had reached a dead end. It meant we had reached the limit of what one system could prove. On Sunday, April 26th, outside counsel arranged a second review focused on the warehouse release. I returned to the factory under the same visitor restrictions, accompanied by my attorney. The production floor was quieter than usual. The suspended Carebridge rollout had reduced weekend shifts, and several employees stood in groups near the break room, speaking softly until I passed. I could not tell whether they believed I had saved them from a dangerous release or endangered their jobs by stopping it. Most probably believed pieces of both. We met in the security office, where a wall of monitors showed loading bays, corridors, controlled doors, and warehouse aisles. The security manager pulled footage from Monday morning. At 7:14, Brittany entered the quarantined area with Dean Holloway, our chief operating officer. Brittany wore a white blazer over a dark dress and carried the tablet used for inventory authorizations. She stopped beside the first row of orange-labeled pallets, while Dean pointed toward the loading lanes. The video had no audio. At 7:19, Brittany signed the tablet. At 7:21, Dean removed the electronic hold from the inventory queue. At 7:43, employees began moving the first cartons toward final packing. Brittany watched the screen from across the room. "I authorized an inventory count," she said. The security manager glanced at outside counsel but said nothing. I asked him to open the transaction record linked to the tablet. The approval screen showed Brittany's executive credentials beside a directive titled Resume Carebridge Packaging and Staged Distribution. Not inventory count. Not inspection. Resume packaging and staged distribution. "You signed the release pathway," I said. "Dean told me the lot still couldn't leave without quality approval. And you knew I had been fired." Dad said the approval had already been completed. At 7:19 Monday morning? He said you had done it before the wedding? The record using my certificate was created at 8:47 Saturday night. You saw that timestamp yesterday. I didn't see it Monday. You also didn't ask to see it. Her mouth tightened. I had been CEO for less than 2 hours. You had held the microphone long enough to fire the person who could have explained it. Gerald shifted in his chair. Brittany relied on the information presented to her. That is what executives do. Brittany relied on the information presented to her. Executives are responsible for deciding whether the information is sufficient, I said. Brittany turned toward me. You would say that. You never think anyone else has enough information unless you are the one giving it to them. That does not change what you signed. No, but it explains why no one asks you questions. You make every question sound like proof we are incompetent. The words landed because part of them was true. I had spent years correcting other people before they finished speaking. I had called it efficiency. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was impatience, wearing a professional name. Outside counsel asked Gerald and Dean to leave while Brittany's role was reviewed separately. My father resisted, but the investor directors supported the request. He left with a warning that the company was losing valuable time. When the door closed, Brittany remained standing. You want me to admit I opened the warehouse, she said. The transaction record already proves that. You want me to say I knew patients could be hurt. Did you? No. Did you know the investigation was unfinished? She looked away. Brittany, I knew you had refused to release the lot. That was not the question. Yes, she said. I knew the investigation was unfinished. The security office felt smaller after that. Why did you sign? I asked. Because Dad said the hold was broader than necessary. He said you were using quality authority to keep veto power after the board chose me. And you believed him? You had spent 15 years making yourself the final answer to every problem. I was the quality director. You were my sister before that, but you never explained anything unless you were issuing an order. I folded my hands on the table to stop myself from interrupting. Brittany continued. At the wedding, when you asked if I had read the quarantine report, you already knew I hadn't seen the full file. You could have told me what the device did. I had tried to raise the issue through the proper channels. That isn't what I said. No, I admitted. It isn't. She looked surprised. I should have explained the failure directly, I said. I should have made sure you understood that the device could look connected while sending no new clinical data. I believed the written record would protect the decision. You believed everyone should trust you without you trusting any of us. I trusted the process. You trusted a process Dad controlled. That was also true. But truth did not erase responsibility. I failed to communicate, I said. You still signed an order you did not understand because you wanted to prove you could overrule me. Her eyes filled, but her voice remained steady. Yes. The admission was quiet enough that the security manager stopped typing. I wanted them to stop comparing me to you, Brittany said. Dad told me if I let your quarantine stand on my first morning, no one would believe I was really CEO. Mom said you had forced me to fire you because you knew I would never do it privately. You chose the microphone. Yes. You chose the words. Yes. Did you want to hurt me? She held my gaze. Yes. There was no excuse left after that answer. I had expected manipulation, fear, and ignorance. I had not expected honesty sharp enough to include cruelty. Brittany lowered herself into the chair opposite me. For once, I wanted you to be the one standing in a room while everyone saw that I had power. You had power. For 5 days. You had enough to move 240 medical devices. She flinched. I did not soften the number. Forgiveness offered too early would have been another way of taking the consequence away from her. The security manager saved the relevant footage. Outside counsel requested Brittany's written statement and ordered that Dean's access be preserved. When we stepped into the corridor, a warm plastic smell drifted from the nearby test laboratory. It pulled me into a memory I had not visited in years. I was 17 again, standing in our garage beside a cracked plastic housing. My father's first commercial prototype lay on the workbench with one corner melted, where Brittany had placed it too close to a portable heater. She had been 12. Her face was streaked with tears. Gerald had spent months building that prototype. When he opened the garage door and saw the damage, I told him I had done it. He shouted at me for nearly an hour. Later, my mother entered my bedroom and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're the older one," she said. "Protecting your sister is what you're supposed to do." At the time, I had mistaken that sentence for love. I had paid for the replacement housing with money from my summer job. Brittany was never required to tell the truth, repair the damage, or see what protecting her had cost me. After that, the pattern repeated in quieter forms. I corrected her reports before Dad saw them. I warned managers before her late promises created problems. I absorbed every family argument because I believed being the older sister meant standing between Brittany and consequences. She had never learned how to carry them because I had never stopped lifting them away. The smell faded when the laboratory door closed. Brittany stood several feet ahead of me, waiting. "I remember the prototype," I said. Her expression changed. "The one you broke?" "I didn't break it." She stared at me. "You left it beside the heater," I said. "I told Dad it was me." I was 12. I was 17. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because I spent years thinking protecting you made me a good sister. It made me useful to Mom and Dad. It did not make either of us stronger." Brittany looked toward the conference room where our parents were waiting. "You should have told the truth." "Yes." The answer surprised her again. "I should have told it then," I said. "You should tell it now." On Monday morning, Brittany provided the executive summary Gerald had emailed before the wedding. It was a 4-page document titled PulseSure Thermal Performance Review. My original technical summary had described 3 critical facts. The communications module could stop transmitting new clinical readings. The device could continue sending status packets. The green indicator could remain active, while no new patient data reached the monitoring center. Gerald's version used one sentence. Temporary reduction in communications performance may occur under extreme environmental conditions during backup power operation. There was no mention of stale data, false connection status, a failed alarm, or the risk that a patient would believe someone was still monitoring them. "Who prepared this?" I asked. "Dad sent it from his account," Brittany said. Outside counsel examined the document history. It had been created on Friday afternoon, after my quarantine order and before the wedding. The last editor was listed as Paige Mercer, Gerald's executive assistant. Paige was invited into the room with her own counsel present. She said Gerald had given her my technical report and marked which language he wanted shortened. She had not seen the raw validation data. "Did Mr. Whitmore ask you to remove the sentence about the green status indicator?" Outside counsel asked. Paige studied the printed document. "He said it was an engineering detail that would confuse the board." "Did he ask you to remove the reference to missing clinical data?" "He said the data was delayed, not missing." "Were you qualified to determine that?" "No." The metadata, my original report, and Paige's statement were preserved together. Gerald had not merely misunderstood the defect. He had changed how it was described before presenting it to Brittany and the board. That afternoon, outside counsel granted me supervised access to a limited set of communication files recovered under the preservation order. I searched for the phrases used in my termination announcement, expecting to find drafts created after CareBridge froze the rollout. A folder labeled Contingency Communications contained 3 versions. The earliest draft was dated April 17th, the day before the wedding. If product concerns became public, Whitmore Remote Care would state that its former quality director had failed to complete validation, withheld information from incoming leadership, and abandoned her responsibilities after being denied the chief executive position. The draft described my departure as voluntary. It described the quarantine as incomplete. It described the conflict as jealousy between sisters. Marilyn's comments appeared in the margin. Emphasize emotional instability after succession announcement. Use wedding images to establish timing and motive. Avoid technical language that invites unnecessary questions. I read the date again. CareBridge had not frozen the contract yet. The hospital incident had not reached the audit committee. Brittany had not opened the warehouse. My parents had prepared the story that would blame me before they knew whether their decision would succeed. They had not fired me and then discovered they needed a scapegoat. They had chosen the scapegoat first. The contingency draft had been written before my father used my certificate, before Brittany opened the warehouse, and before CareBridge froze the rollout. That fact changed the shape of everything. My parents had not panicked after the damage was done and chosen the nearest person to blame. They had prepared my motive, my failure, and my public disgrace while the outcome was still unknown. On Wednesday morning, my attorney and I reviewed the document with outside audit counsel. The original file had been created at 4:18 on April 17th, the afternoon before Brittany's wedding. Marilyn's comments appeared throughout the margins. Replace technical disagreement with leadership dispute. Emphasize that Rachel withheld information during the succession process. Use wedding photographs to establish her emotional reaction. Avoid detailed discussion of device performance. The draft said I had failed to complete validation, kept critical information from incoming leadership, and resigned after learning that Brittany would become CEO. None of it was true, but each lie had been placed beside a true event. There had been an unfinished investigation. I had not shared every detail with Brittany. I had left the wedding after she was announced as CEO. My parents had built their story the same way the defective device created its green light. They preserved enough normal signals to make the missing truth difficult to see. Outside counsel asked whether I had known the succession announcement was coming. No. Had you discussed leaving the company before the wedding? No. Had you requested the CEO position? No. Did you withhold the validation results from the board? I sent the quarantine notice, corrective action number, and preliminary findings to the audit committee before the ceremony. My attorney placed the delivery confirmations beside the draft. The contrast was almost clean enough to be satisfying. Almost. A false story could be disproved. That did not mean everyone who had believed it would admit why they found it convenient. After the meeting, Brittany waited for me in the parking garage. She stood beside a white SUV with her arms crossed against the cool air. Her wedding ring caught the overhead light when she lifted one hand. "You found something else," she said. It was not a question. "Outside counsel will contact you." "Rachel, stop talking to me like I'm a witness." "You are a witness. I'm your sister. You were also the CEO who authorized the warehouse release." She glanced toward the security camera mounted above the elevator. "Can we go somewhere private? We can speak with our attorneys present. I'm not trying to trap you." "I don't know that yet." The answer hurt her. I could see it in the way she pressed her lips together, but distrust was not cruelty when it had been earned. She opened the passenger door of her SUV and removed a printed copy of the contingency draft. "I saw this in the review folder," she said. "Mom wrote those comments." "Yes." She said it was only a communications exercise. It was created before the crisis they claim it was designed to manage. Brittany looked down at the first page. "If this goes to the full committee, Dad will say I handed you confidential material. You did not give it to me. Outside counsel recovered it. He'll still say I betrayed the family. That is not a legal defense. It matters to the investor directors. One of them supported my appointment because Dad promised a stable transition. If they think I can't control this, they can remove me." I studied her face. A week earlier, losing the CEO title would have sounded like justice. Now I understood the position had become more dangerous than valuable, but Brittany was not ready to release the one thing she had spent her life trying to obtain. "What are you asking me to do?" I said. "Give me 2 days." "For what?" "To talk to Mom and Dad. To make them understand how bad this looks before the document is formally submitted." "They know how it looks. They wrote it." "You know what I mean." "I do. You want them to change course without having to admit publicly what they did. I want a chance to keep the company from tearing itself apart." The company is already being torn apart. The only question is whether the truth is documented before they decide who should absorb the damage. She folded the pages against her chest. You always make the worst interpretation sound like the only rational one, and you keep asking me to delay because you hope they will become different people in private. Her eyes flashed. There are parents. That has been the excuse attached to every boundary they crossed. Brittany turned away, then looked back. One day. Let me bring them the document tonight. Let me tell them I won't support that version. I considered the request. The old pattern would have been easy. I would have taken the document away, confronted my parents myself, and allowed Brittany to remain uncertain about which side she had chosen. Then, when the consequences came, she could tell herself she had never truly participated. I refused to do that again. You have until 6 tomorrow evening, I said. By then, you will provide a written statement to outside counsel, explaining what you knew when you signed the warehouse order and when you first saw this draft. Her expression changed from relief to alarm. That isn't what I asked. It is what I am offering. I will attend one conversation with Mom and Dad because you asked for a witness. After that, the document is submitted whether you are ready or not. You do that to me, I will stand beside you while you tell the truth. I will not stand in front of its consequences for you. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she nodded. My parents' home sat on 5 landscaped acres outside New Albany, 40 minutes from my apartment when traffic was light. The house had grown with the company. The original brick colonial had been expanded twice, first with a glass conservatory and later with an executive office wing my mother called the library. I arrived the next afternoon with my attorney. Brittany had her own counsel on speakerphone. Gerald and Marilyn had company counsel sitting at the dining table, which told me they had never intended the meeting to be a family conversation. My mother had set out coffee in white porcelain cups. No one touched it. Gerald placed the contingency draft in front of him. This is a standard crisis communications exercise. Standard exercises do not invent misconduct by a named employee before the supposed crisis, my attorney said. It was an early draft. Marilyn folded her hands. A company has to prepare for different possibilities. The public does not respond well to technical confusion. We needed a clear narrative in case Rachel reacted badly to the succession announcement. You wrote that I abandoned validation, I said. We wrote that you might appear to have abandoned it. That is not what the document says. My mother's tone remained smooth. Your reaction at the wedding made the scenario more credible than we expected. You arranged the announcement and the firing. We arranged a leadership transition. You asked the photographer to capture it. For company history, you commented that the wedding images should be used to establish my emotional motive. Her eyes moved briefly toward company counsel. Gerald answered instead. No statement was released. You are trying to punish us for words in a draft while an actual company is close to collapse. Who is the draft meant to protect? I asked. Everyone. It did not protect me. You were the source of the instability. I issued a quarantine. You escalated a correctable component problem into an existential threat. The defect allowed a device to appear connected while sending no current patient data. And now CareBridge has suspended payments, the bank is reviewing our credit line, and 200 employees are wondering whether they will have jobs next month. His argument carried weight because the employees were real. Their mortgages were real. The supplier invoices were real. Gerald's manipulation worked best when he placed innocent people between himself and accountability. That risk does not give you permission to create a false approval, I said. We are not discussing the approval. We are discussing why you needed a story that blamed me before you used my credentials. My father's face tightened. Be very careful. I have been careful. That is why the records still exist. Marilyn turned to Brittany. This is what she does. She takes one document, removes every human consideration, and turns the family into defendants. Brittany sat with both hands under the table. Mom, why did you say to use the wedding photos? To protect the company from the appearance of retaliation. You wanted people to think Rachel left because I became CEO. We needed to explain the timing. But she didn't leave. I fired her. My mother gave a small, patient sigh. You were under enormous pressure. No one pressured me to use the microphone. Gerald looked at Brittany sharply. This is not the time to perform remorse. I'm not performing. Then act like the CEO we appointed. The word appointed settled over the table differently than it had at the wedding. There, it had sounded like a crown. In my parents' dining room, it sounded like a reminder of ownership. Gerald slid a folder toward me. Inside was a proposed separation agreement. The amount was large enough to pay my legal fees, replace several years of salary, and allow me to walk away without financial urgency. It included a neutral employment reference, a statement thanking me for my service, and a future consulting position after the CareBridge rollout stabilized. The final page required me to acknowledge that the executive summary presented before the wedding accurately reflected the known product risk at that time. It did not require me to say the product was safe. It required something more useful. It required me to validate the document that had hidden why it might not be. You are offering me money to confirm a false summary, I said. Gerald leaned back. We are offering you a dignified exit and a chance to prevent unnecessary damage. The summary omitted the stale data condition, the false connected status, and the failed missing data alarm. Those were preliminary findings. They were the findings that justified quarantine. Marilyn spoke softly. Think beyond yourself. If the bank withdraws support, families will lose their homes. Patients will lose access to a useful product. Brittany's marriage has barely begun, and she has spent her first week answering lawyers instead of being with her husband. Evan is an adult, Brittany said. He can survive a postponed honeymoon. My mother's eyes cooled. You say that now. Gerald tapped the agreement. Sign the acknowledgement. We complete the corrective work without destroying confidence. The company survives. Employees remain paid. You receive the recognition you have always claimed we denied you. I did not ask for recognition in exchange for silence. You asked for control. No, I asked you to keep a dangerous lot in quarantine. He pushed the folder closer. I closed it and returned it untouched. The employees did not authorize you to use their jobs as a shield, I said. If the company survives, it will survive because the defect is corrected and the records are honest. Not because I accepted payment to make your version cleaner. Gerald looked at Brittany. End this. She stared at him. How? You are the CEO. Confirm that the executive summary was adequate. Direct the audit committee to separate the communications issue from the product review and restore stability. The committee does not report to me. You hold the deciding board seat. Marilyn reached across the table and touched Brittany's wrist. Your wedding photographs are already circulating. People are asking why you canceled the honeymoon. If this becomes public, the first week of your marriage will be attached to a scandal forever. You can stop that. Brittany looked at her mother's hand, then at the separation agreement in front of me. What happens if I don't? She asked. Gerald's answer came without hesitation. Then the board will have to determine whether you are capable of leading through a crisis. The offer had disappeared. The threat underneath it had not. Brittany drew her hand away from Marilyn. She did not support me. She did not reject them. She simply said she needed time to review everything with her lawyer. For once, I did not rescue her from the silence that followed. We left 20 minutes later. In the driveway, Brittany asked me to wait. She climbed into her SUV and returned with her laptop. There's an email I wasn't supposed to see, she said. She had been copied accidentally on a message Gerald sent to company counsel hours after CareBridge froze the rollout. The subject line read, CEO Personal Exposure. Gerald asked whether the board, the founders, or the company could avoid responsibility if the new CEO had independently authorized release of quarantined inventory without fully informing the directors. He asked whether Brittany's signature created personal liability. He asked whether the founders could state they relied on the authority of the CEO once she assumed office. There was no dramatic document calling her reckless, no prepared speech naming her as the villain. There was something colder, a legal question asking how far my parents could stand from the decision once it exploded. Brittany read the email twice. They told me I was the future of the company. They needed your signature. They said the board chose me because I could lead. They chose you because you wanted their approval badly enough to act before asking what you were being asked to carry. She closed the laptop. You think the whole appointment was a trap. I think the title was real, as long as it served them. So was the risk. Her voice dropped. They put me there to take the fall. Not only for that, they wanted you to succeed. They wanted the contract, the photographs, and the perfect succession story. But if it failed, they made sure you were standing closest to the consequences. Brittany sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. For the first time since the wedding, she was not asking me to fix anything. The next morning, she sent her written statement to outside counsel. She admitted that she had signed the warehouse order without reading the full validation file, relied on Gerald's shortened summary, and knew the investigation was incomplete. At 5:47 that afternoon, she texted me that she was ready to speak to the audit committee. At 5:52, another email arrived. The board meeting scheduled for the following week had been moved to 8 the next morning. The agenda contained 2 items: CareBridge response strategy, CEO performance and leadership capacity. My parents were no longer waiting for Brittany to decide whether she would tell the truth. They were preparing to remove her before she could. The board meeting began at 8 the next morning, but my parents did not get the vote they had scheduled. Gerald opened by arguing that Brittany had failed to stabilize the CareBridge relationship and had allowed a technical review to become a threat to the company's survival. Marilyn sat beside him with a printed packet of payroll figures, supplier obligations, and lender notices arranged in front of her like evidence in a trial. Brittany attended with her attorney. I joined as an advisor to the audit committee, accompanied by mine. Elias appeared on the conference room screen, but CareBridge had not yet delivered its final conditions for continuing the contract. That absence stopped the vote. The 2 investor directors refused to decide whether Brittany should remain CEO until they knew what CareBridge required and whether removing her would damage the investigation. They also refused Gerald's request to restore his full authority over the suspended rollout. The compromise satisfied no one. Brittany kept the title, but she could not release inventory, sign regulatory submissions, alter complaint classifications, terminate staff connected to the investigation, or approve any CareBridge response without outside counsel. Gerald remained chairman and retained operational influence while the audit continued. My parents had not regained everything, but they still controlled enough of the company to make current employees afraid. Before the meeting ended, Gerald asked for a list of everyone who had communicated with me since my termination. Outside counsel refused. My father said he needed to identify unauthorized disclosures. The investor directors reminded him that retaliation against witnesses would violate the board's preservation order and could trigger the lender's intervention. Gerald did not argue further, but the expression he gave the room made one thing clear. He intended to find the names through other means. Outside the building, Brittany caught up with me. "They postponed my execution," she said. "They postponed a governance decision." That is the kind of sentence you use when you want something to sound less personal. It is personal. It is also a governance decision. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. Dad will start questioning every manager who had access to the files. Then document it. I am trying. Trying is not the same as protecting them. Her eyes narrowed. You think I don't know that now? I think knowing something for one morning does not undo years of relying on him. She looked toward the factory entrance, where Gerald was speaking with Dean Holloway and the head of human resources. What happens when people decide talking to me is too dangerous? She asked. You learn what leadership feels like when the title stops protecting you. I left before she could ask me to solve that too. That afternoon, my attorney received a letter from counsel representing Dana Cho. Dana had submitted a protected disclosure through the Independent Ethics Channel. Her attorney stated that she possessed first-hand knowledge of the validation tests, the disappearance of the quarantine status, and the handling of the wedding demonstration unit. The letter also said Dana would not communicate directly with Whitmore management, the founders, Brittany, or me without legal protection in place. I did not blame her. 2 days earlier, I had been desperate to find her. Now I understood that disappearing had been the first decision she had made after recognizing that everyone above her could use her work and leave her exposed. We met the next morning at her lawyer's office in downtown Columbus. Dana sat at the far end of a small conference table with a legal pad in front of her. She looked tired, but not frightened in the way she had sounded on the phone. Having an attorney beside her had given shape to the fear. My lawyer and I remained across from them. Dana's attorney began by stating that the conversation was voluntary, protected, and limited to facts Dana personally knew. No one was asking her to provide customer information, controlled originals, or files taken outside authorized channels. Then Dana looked at me. I sent the original test results to CareBridge, she said. I had suspected it, but hearing her admit it still changed the room. When? I asked. Monday morning, after I saw the quarantine status was gone. How? Through the reporting address in the CareBridge Quality Agreement. The one for supplier safety concerns. You had access to that? You made us review the contract requirements during onboarding. I nodded. What did you send? The raw test package that had already been attached to the corrective action before your account was disabled. No patient data. No proprietary design files beyond what was needed to identify the failed module. Did you use my credentials? No. Did you restore my certificate? No. Did you remove the serial number page from the working folder? No. Her answers came quickly, but her hands remained clasped around the pen. Why did your company access disappear? I asked. My manager told me to sign a statement saying the test conditions were outside intended use. I refused. Human Resources suspended me while they reviewed whether I had disclosed confidential material. Did you tell them you contacted CareBridge? My attorney did. Dana's lawyer added that Whitmore had been notified the disclosure involved a safety concern and that any retaliation would be documented. I asked Dana why she had not contacted me again. She gave a short laugh without humor. Because you were part of the reason I didn't know what to do. I waited. You always told us to preserve records, she said. You told us never to change language just because an executive disliked it. You made us document every decision. But you never told us who would protect us when the executive was your father. I believed the audit process would. You believed in a process he helped build. I know that now. No, you know it happened to you. That is different. The sentence was fair enough to sting. Dana leaned forward. When you were fired, I did not know whether I was supposed to keep following your quarantine. I did not know whether the committee had your full report. I did not know whether CareBridge had been told. You knew the risk was larger than a failed bench test, but you gave me tasks instead of context. I thought I was limiting your exposure. You limited my ability to make an informed choice. I could have defended myself. I could have said I had been trying to keep her outside a family power struggle. Both statements would have been true. Neither would have changed what my silence had cost her. You are right, I said. I treated information like something I could ration for your protection. That left you alone when the people above you changed the rules. Dana studied me as if waiting for the qualification that usually followed an apology. I did not add one. I will not ask you to testify without your lawyer, I continued. I will not ask you to return to the factory. I will not decide what risk you should accept. If you choose to help, the audit committee needs to provide written whistleblower protection and control how your evidence is handled. Her shoulders lowered slightly. That is the first useful thing you have said to me since this started, she replied. Once the terms were documented, we moved to the missing serial number page. Dana remembered preparing a controlled working copy for the audit committee packet on the Friday before the wedding. The original remained in the electronic quality system. The printed page listed the retained test units, including the serial number of a device used during heat and backup power testing. That afternoon, Marilyn's events coordinator had asked for the cleanest-looking PulseSure unit for the foundation display. I told her the unit was part of validation, Dana said. She said it wasn't going to be used on a patient. It was only a prop. Who packed it? I asked. I did, with Paige Mercer. Paige needed the serial number for the display card, so she pulled the working page from the folder and copied it. Did she return it? I thought she clipped it inside the transport box. What happened to the unit after the reception? The foundation team took all the display materials to their storage warehouse. I remembered the device glowing beside the service corridor. I also remembered how warm its casing had felt. Dana added another detail. The display equipment had been loaded into a closed delivery van shortly after noon. Because the loading entrance was blocked by floral trucks, the van sat in the sun for nearly 2 hours before staff moved the boxes inside. Later that evening, the service outlet powering the display failed. The unit operated on its internal backup battery for approximately 45 minutes before I photographed it. The conditions were no longer mysterious. The device had absorbed heat inside the van, then operated on backup power long enough to reproduce the same failure Dana had seen in the lab. The green light at the wedding had not been a random electrical glitch. It had been the defect performing in front of the people who were celebrating the company's future. Outside Audit Counsel obtained formal access to the Whitmore Family Foundation storage facility the next day. Dana, her attorney, my attorney, and I attended with an independent evidence technician. The warehouse sat behind a row of commercial offices on the north side of Columbus. Inside were stacked gala signs, unused donation boxes, branded tablecloths, and photographs from years of campaigns showing my mother beside patients, nurses, and community leaders. We did not search freely. The foundation manager identified the containers returned from Brittany's wedding. The evidence technician photographed each box before opening it and recorded every person present. The PulseSure unit rested inside a padded case beneath a folded banner that read "Compassion Through Connection." The irony did not need explanation. The technician photographed the device in place. Dana read the serial number without touching it. It matched one of the retained units in the quarantined validation group. The working serial number page was clipped inside the lid, exactly where Dana believed Paige had placed it. Outside counsel later compared the printed number against the controlled original in the electronic quality system. They matched. No one powered on the device at the warehouse. No one connected it to a laptop. The technician sealed the case, assigned an evidence number, completed the chain of custody form, and transported it directly to the independent laboratory. By the following evening, the lab had created a forensic image of the internal log. The wedding record showed the device had switched to backup power. New clinical data stopped shortly afterward. Status packets continued, preventing the receiving system from labeling the unit offline. The log supported Dana's test findings, but outside counsel warned everyone not to treat it as conclusive by itself. The unit had traveled, been displayed, and spent days in foundation storage. That was why the lab tested it beside 2 retained units taken directly from controlled inventory. Under the same defined temperature and backup power conditions, all 3 units behaved the same way. Clinical readings stopped. Keep alive packets continued. The receiving dashboard showed an active connection. The green indicator remained on. The defect could be reproduced without relying on patient records, family testimony, or a single device with a complicated history. Elias reviewed the protocol remotely and agreed CareBridge would attend a controlled demonstration before the board, the lender representative, and the relevant department heads. The independent lab would operate the equipment. Whitmore management would not be allowed to alter the protocol or handle the test units. For the first time since my termination, we had a way to show the truth instead of merely arguing over who described it more convincingly. Dana remained beside me after the lawyers finished discussing the demonstration. "You know they'll say I sabotaged the company," she said. "They will say whatever protects their authority." "That doesn't answer me." "No," I said. "It doesn't. The answer is that your disclosure will remain protected. Outside counsel will preserve the evidence. And I will state publicly that the quarantine existed before you contacted CareBridge. You can't stop them from coming after me. I can't promise that. I can promise I will not leave you standing alone while pretending a procedure is enough." She nodded once. That evening, while I was driving home, my phone filled with messages from former colleagues. Marilyn had scheduled a mandatory all-company meeting for the following morning. The invitation had been sent to every employee, the board, and the lender's restructuring advisor. The subject line read, "Protecting Whitmore Jobs from Deliberate Sabotage." The first paragraph described an embittered former executive who had coordinated with an employee to remove confidential information, frighten a major customer, and endanger more than 200 livelihoods. My name appeared in the second sentence. Dana's appeared in the third. The device my mother had once placed beneath a banner about compassion was now sealed inside an independent laboratory as evidence. Before anyone at Whitmore could see what it proved, Marilyn intended to make sure they knew whom to hate. The all-company meeting began at 9 on May 7th. But I was not allowed inside the building. Outside Audit Counsel had warned me the night before that attending without a formal role could give my parents exactly what they wanted. A confrontation they could present as proof that I had returned to intimidate employees. So I stayed in my attorney's conference room 3 miles away, while more than 200 people filled Whitmore's cafeteria and watched Gerald and Marilyn take the stage. An hour later, a production supervisor sent the recording to the Independent Ethics Channel. Outside counsel confirmed that employees who had attended were permitted to retain the company-distributed video, then gave my attorney access. My father stood beneath the Whitmore logo with his jacket unbuttoned and his sleeves rolled once at the wrists. It was a pose he used whenever he wanted employees to see the founder rather than the chairman. This company is facing an aggressive attempt to turn a rare technical condition into a reason to destroy 30 years of work, he said. CareBridge has suspended the rollout while outside parties pressure them with incomplete information. He never used my name in the first 5 minutes. He did not need to. Behind him, the presentation showed the $100 million contract value, the $12 million expansion loan, and a photograph of the new production line filled with employees. Another slide displayed the phrase, 200 families depend on what we do next. My mother took the microphone. Marilyn did not raise her voice. She never needed to. She spoke as if she were sharing something painful with people she trusted. A former leader who disagreed with the company's succession plan has provided documents outside their proper context, she said. Another employee removed sensitive materials and contacted a customer before our internal review was complete. Dana's photograph did not appear, but her title did. Validation engineer. My mother paused long enough for everyone in the room to understand. We are not asking anyone to ignore safety, she continued. We are asking people not to mistake personal resentment for public service. The recording showed employees looking toward one another. Some appeared angry, others frightened. A few looked down at their phones. Gerald returned to the microphone and said payroll was safe for the current period, but a prolonged freeze could force reductions in hours, delayed supplier payments, and the suspension of expansion work. Every statement contained enough truth to survive casual examination. The contract freeze did threaten cash flow. The test condition required heat and backup power. Dana had contacted CareBridge before management finished its own review. I had opposed Brittany's appointment. My parents did not need to invent an entirely false world. They only needed to arrange the facts so their decisions disappeared from the center of it. Near the end, Marilyn invited employees to report anyone circulating unverified claims through management. She did not mention the independent ethics channel. When the video ended, I sat in silence while my attorney closed her laptop. They're identifying witnesses without naming them, she said. They're also telling employees that speaking outside Gerald's chain of command is disloyal. You can issue a response. I can issue a factual statement. I'm not giving them a public argument. Before we drafted anything, my phone showed a message from Warren Pierce. I watched the meeting. I believe you found something real. But I have 63 people in my department, and I cannot stand beside you if doing that makes us the first group they cut. A year earlier, his refusal would have felt like betrayal. That morning, I could see the fear behind it. Warren had spent 19 years at Whitmore. His wife had recently reduced her work hours to care for her mother. Most of his technicians had children, car payments, and health insurance tied to the company. I replied that I understood, and that he should preserve any instructions affecting safety or records through the independent channel. He did not answer. My attorney released a 3-sentence statement before noon. The PulseSure lot had been placed under formal quarantine before my termination. I had not authorized its release. I was cooperating with the independent audit, CareBridge, and the company's regulatory review, and I would not comment further while those processes remained active. There was no accusation. No mention of my parents. No defense of my personality. Marilyn's communications team responded within 20 minutes by saying the company welcomed a complete review. By 2 that afternoon, 3 former colleagues had removed me from social media. 2 more sent messages asking whether their jobs were safe, as if I controlled the answer. Someone posted a cropped wedding photograph, showing me leaving the reception beside the words, "She couldn't handle her sister winning." I saved the post for counsel and closed the application. I had spent most of my career believing I did not care what people thought, as long as my work was correct. That belief was easier when I still had an office, a title, and a system that made people listen. Without those things, being correct felt very different from being believed. My mother called at 4:15. Because the call came after my written instruction that company matters go through counsel, I almost declined it. Then my attorney advised me to answer on speaker with her present and state that the conversation might be documented in my notes. Marilyn agreed. "I saw your statement," she said. "It was colder than necessary. It was factual. You could have reassured the employees." I cannot promise them the company is safe when I do not control its finances or records. You could reassure them that you are not trying to destroy it. My actions already show that. Your actions have frozen the largest agreement in our history. Cairbridge froze it after receiving safety evidence. Evidence Dana took because you encouraged her to distrust us. I did not know she contacted Cairbridge until her attorney disclosed it. My mother let out a slow breath. You always hide behind exact wording. Exact wording matters when you are accusing people of sabotage. Her tone softened. Do you remember the prototype in the garage? I looked toward my attorney. She wrote the date and subject on her legal pad. Yes, you protected Brittany because you loved her. I took responsibility for something she did because you told me an older sister was supposed to. You were 17. She was 12. And you turned that choice into a rule for the rest of my life? That is unfair. You reminded me of the same rule when you asked me to sign a false document. I asked you to protect a company that has supported this family and hundreds of others. You asked me to protect Gerald's decision from the consequences of his own record. If this company collapses, do you think the technicians will care who wrote which email? Do you think their children will be comforted because you preserve the purity of a process? I think employees deserve a company that does not use their mortgages to excuse hidden safety risks. You will have to live with what happens to them. So will you. For the first time, the softness left her voice. You are enjoying this. No. You finally have everyone asking for your help. You finally have Brittany frightened enough to admit she needs you. Do not pretend there is no satisfaction in that. The accusation found a place I had not wanted to examine. A part of me had felt satisfaction when Brittany called. A part of me had wanted my father to look at the access log and understand that he had underestimated me. That did not make the quarantine wrong. It did mean I needed to keep my pride out of the decisions that followed. I am not signing the acknowledgement, I said. I am not accepting responsibility for the release. I will help build a lawful correction plan if independent counsel controls the process. You could end this today. No, I could help you hide it today. Ending it will take longer. I ended the call after she repeated that I was choosing strangers over my family. That evening, Elias asked to meet with me, my attorney, regulatory counsel, and the 2 investor directors. Brittany joined from her office. He did not congratulate us for finding the demonstration unit or proving the defect could be reproduced. The evidence is sufficient to continue the investigation, he said. It is not sufficient to preserve the contract. Brittany leaned toward the camera. What else do you need? A corrective plan that can be verified, a budget, a field action schedule, a determination from regulatory counsel regarding medical device reporting, a correction or removal strategy if affected units have entered service, an independent quality structure, and leadership capable of carrying those obligations through without interference. We can provide that, she said. Elias looked at her. Who is we? No one answered immediately. He continued. Removing 2 founders without a replacement operating structure creates another risk. If the board believes the only alternatives are Gerald Whitmore's control or operational collapse, they will choose the control they know. My father had built his defense around that exact fear. He had made himself appear inseparable from the company, then used every threat to the company as a reason he must remain. I asked, how long do we have? Cairbridge requires a preliminary plan by May 12th. If it is not credible, we will terminate the suspended rollout and notify the relevant distribution partners. 3 business days. What must the plan prove? I asked. That the defect can be contained, the field population can be identified, high-risk patients can be prioritized, the reporting decision is being made by qualified counsel, and future safety decisions cannot be overridden by the same executives whose conduct is under review. Brittany's face changed at the final condition. You mean Dad? She said. I mean any executive whose authority compromises the corrective process. After the meeting, I remained with Elias and regulatory counsel to define the work streams. I had once responded to pressure by gathering every task into my own hands. This time, I made a list of what I did not know and who could answer it better. We needed the software team to determine whether firmware could stop keep-alive packets when clinical data stopped. We needed hardware engineers to assess whether the communications module required replacement. We needed operations to identify every serial number shipped. We needed customer service to reconstruct complaints whose labels had been changed. We needed finance to calculate the correction cost without assuming the CareBridge payments would arrive on schedule. We needed regulatory counsel to own the FDA assessment. My role was not to perform all of it. My role was to keep the work connected and prevent anyone from changing the question when an answer became inconvenient. The first employee came forward the following morning. Her name was Teresa Alvarez, a customer service supervisor who had worked under Maryland's communications structure. Through outside counsel, she provided a guidance sheet instructing staff to classify green indicator with no updated readings as training required or local connectivity concern. The guidance included no instruction to notify quality. Teresa wrote that she had followed it because Maryland's office said the wording had been approved by leadership. She did not call herself a whistleblower. She said only that she could no longer tell which complaints had been counted. 2 hours later, a software engineer named Caleb Ross requested a protected interview. He explained that the green indicator could be changed through firmware, so it would turn off unless the central system confirmed receipt of current clinical data. But he warned that firmware alone might not solve the heat-related communications failure. The light can stop lying, he told us. That doesn't make the transmitter reliable. A hardware engineer joined later and said a replacement module already used in another product line might tolerate the temperature range, but it would require bench testing, compatibility review, and field validation. None of them declared loyalty to me. They spoke through lawyers, limited their statements to their expertise, and returned to work without asking to be seen beside me. That was enough. For the first time, I stopped measuring support by who defended my name. They were protecting the facts. I could work with that. By late afternoon on May 9th, we had the outline of a legitimate response, but not yet a plan CareBridge could accept. The affected population was larger than the 240 units released after my termination. Complaint patterns suggested earlier production lots might contain the same module. Operations needed to trace every serial number before we could define the field action. Finance had not yet committed funds. Regulatory counsel had not completed the reportability decision. The board had not agreed to remove Gerald and Marilyn from operational control. At 6:10, Elias sent a formal deadline notice. CareBridge required the preliminary corrective package by noon on May 12th. Without it, the rollout would be terminated. Brittany called less than a minute after the notice arrived. "Can you save the contract?" she asked. "Not by myself." "Can the team do it?" "We can build the technical plan." That wasn't my question. I looked at the draft governance conditions attached to Elias's email. CareBridge would continue only if quality reported to an independent committee, field corrections were protected from founder interference, and Gerald and Marilyn were suspended from all operational authority during the investigation and remediation. I read the condition twice before answering, not without ending the way this company is controlled. Brittany was silent. Then Elias forwarded the same draft to the full board. My sister opened it while we were still on the phone. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its panic. What remained was fear, with nowhere left to hide. "My vote is the one that decides that." "My vote is the one that decides that," Brittany said. Her voice had changed since the first call from the packing floor. The panic was still there, but it had settled beneath something heavier. For the first time, she understood that the title she had wanted all her life carried a decision no one else could make for her. The Whitmore board had 5 voting seats. My father controlled 2 through himself and a longtime director who had followed him since the company's early years. The 2 investor directors supported the independent corrective process. Brittany held the 5th seat as chief executive officer. 3 votes could suspend Gerald and Marilyn from their officer roles, place operational authority under the independent committee, and activate the temporary governance agreement required by CareBridge and the lender. Without Brittany, the vote split 2-2. "Do you know how you'll vote?" I asked. "No." "Then don't promise me. You sound disappointed." "I would be disappointed if you promised something tonight because you were afraid, then changed your mind when they were sitting across from you." She was quiet for several seconds. "How do you always make doing the right thing sound like a procedure?" "Because procedures still exist when courage fails. That is not comforting. It is not supposed to be." The first corrective planning session began the next morning in a conference room leased by outside counsel, far enough from the factory that Gerald could not walk in and take control of the conversation. Dana sat beside her attorney. Caleb Ross represented software engineering. Priya Nandakumar, one of our senior hardware engineers, joined with the independent laboratory's validation lead. Elias attended for CareBridge. Regulatory counsel, finance, operations, and the lender's restructuring advisor occupied the other side of the table. No one called it Rachel's team. That mattered to me more than I expected. For years, I had built my value around being the person who knew the complete answer. That morning, the most responsible thing I could do was admit where my knowledge ended. I began by writing 4 questions on the board. Which devices could fail? Which patients faced the greatest risk? What could reduce the danger immediately? What had to change before normal distribution resumed? Operations had traced the vulnerable communications module across approximately 2,400 PulseSure units. 240 had been released after my termination. Earlier shipments contained another group assembled with the same component. 600 units were currently assigned to patients considered high risk because they lived alone, had recent cardiac procedures, or relied heavily on remote monitoring. We start with them, I said. The operations manager nodded. We can reach most through CareBridge within 48 hours. Reach is not the same as correct, Elias said. What do you tell them while the replacement plan is being organized? Caleb answered first. The central software can flag any device sending status packets without fresh clinical readings. We can deploy that monitoring rule quickly. How quickly? I asked. 48 hours for a controlled release, assuming CareBridge gives us a test environment today. Elias agreed. Priya explained that the module used in another Whitmore product could tolerate the required temperature range, but replacing it was not as simple as exchanging one part. We need compatibility testing, battery testing, signal testing, and confirmation that the new module does not introduce another failure, she said. I can give you a validation protocol in 3 days. I cannot give you a proven correction in 3 days. Then don't, I said. Give us the honest schedule. I saw Dana look at me when I said it. The plan divided the response into waves. The first wave would prioritize the 600 high-risk patients. Until their devices were inspected or replaced, CareBridge would add human review for missing clinical data, contact patients directly, and provide instructions to check the device after outages or high-temperature conditions. The second wave would cover the remaining affected field units. The third would address inventory that had never reached patients. Caleb's firmware change would stop the green indicator from remaining on, unless the receiving system confirmed current clinical data. Priya's hardware work would correct the heat-related transmission failure. The independent lab would validate both changes together. The light can no longer claim the connection exists merely because the device has power, Caleb said. That protects the patient from a false signal, I replied. It does not replace the module work. He nodded. Agreed. Regulatory counsel then addressed the part no one could solve with engineering. Based on the hospitalization, the potential for serious injury if the malfunction recurred, and the evidence that the same failure could exist across multiple devices, the company would prepare a 30-day medical device report. Counsel would also coordinate the required correction or removal reporting once the field action formally began. Brittany shifted in her chair. Does filing mean we are admitting the device injured someone? It means the company is reporting the information required for the agency to evaluate the event, counsel said. Trying to avoid the appearance of responsibility is not the same as meeting the obligation. My mother would have hated that sentence. The customer response plan included a dedicated hotline, scripts reviewed by quality rather than communications, written instructions that did not blame home internet service without evidence, and a process for escalating every missing data complaint. I assigned owners to each workstream and asked them to state what resources they needed. I did not rewrite Caleb's software schedule. I did not tell Priya how to run her hardware tests. I did not answer for regulatory counsel. When Dana described the complaint review process, I let her finish without correcting her wording. By noon, the whiteboard held a plan created by people who understood different parts of the problem better than I did. That did not make me less necessary. It made the plan stronger. The financial meeting was harder. Whitmore Remote Care had approximately $44 million in annual revenue before the CareBridge rollout. The company carried a $12 million expansion loan and a $4 million revolving credit line. My father had expanded the production floor, hired employees, and committed to supplier orders, based on the assumption that the first CareBridge payments would arrive that spring. The contract freeze put the company at risk of violating its lender covenants, but not immediately. "We have weeks, not days," the restructuring advisor said. "If the board accepts the governance conditions and provides a credible remediation budget, the lender is willing to discuss forbearance." The preliminary correction estimate was $3.8 million. That figure covered field communication, replacement modules, labor, independent testing, temporary patient monitoring, customer support, and contingency reserves. It did not include every possible legal claim. Brittany looked at the number. "Can the company absorb that?" The finance director answered carefully. "Not while paying every discretionary founder benefit and assuming the CareBridge revenue begins on the original schedule." He placed 2 agreements on the table. "My father expected a $2.4 million founder performance bonus when the rollout reached its first commercial milestone. My parents also expected a $1.2 million transition fee tied to the executive succession. Both payments depended on representations that the company was in compliance with its quality obligations and that no material safety matter had been concealed. The conditions had not been met. The board can withhold them," the finance director said. "If any amount has already been advanced, counsel may pursue a clawback." Brittany stared at the pages. Dad planned to use that money to pay down the loan on the house and his personal guarantees. "That does not make it a company obligation," I said. "He'll say he risked his personal assets to build the expansion." "He did. And you don't think that matters?" "It matters when we explain why he was afraid. It does not turn a contingent bonus into a right." The finance director pointed to the remediation budget. "If the founder payments were withheld and CareBridge redirected part of its first future milestone toward correction costs, the company could fund the first wave without immediate layoffs." That was the moment the conflict became impossible to disguise. My parents had repeatedly said they were protecting employee jobs. The clearest path to protecting those jobs required them to surrender the money and authority they had expected to receive. By the afternoon, outside counsel had added 2 final evidence packages to the audit record. The first came from customer service. Teresa Alvarez produced the complete email chain behind the complaint classification guidance. My mother had personally instructed the department not to use the phrases transmission failure, missed alert, or device malfunction until communications leadership reviewed the complaint. One attached memo described the exact scenario we had reproduced. Unit indicator remains green, while central team receives no current readings. Marilyn had commented beneath it, "Do not characterize as a missed alert unless clinical review confirms patient harm. Use connectivity support language until executive review." She had understood enough to recognize the danger of the words. Instead of sending the pattern to quality, she had controlled the language until the pattern disappeared inside harmless categories. The second evidence package came from the component supplier. Months earlier, one of their engineers had warned that the cheaper communications module had a lower validated temperature range than the part specified in the original PulseSure design. The email recommended additional testing before use in devices expected to operate during power interruptions or in homes without stable climate control. Gerald replied that the component change had to remain in place to protect the CareBridge schedule. He did not write that patient safety was irrelevant. He wrote something more believable. "We can complete broader validation after launch." Missing this production window creates a greater business risk than the theoretical thermal concern. The concern had not been theoretical. He simply had not wanted to wait long enough to prove it. Martin Vale, the IT director, also signed a protected statement. He confirmed that Gerald had instructed him to preserve continuity of executive approvals after my termination, and that the administrator restoring my certificate had not been told I had expressly refused to release the continuity. A lot. Martin still could not identify who had physically used the computer, but he could establish why the credential had become available. The pieces no longer depended on one dramatic confession. Gerald knew the component needed more testing. He minimized the risk in the executive summary. He removed me after I quarantined the lot. He ordered my approval credential restored. A release carrying my name appeared after I was gone. Marilyn knew complaints described a green light with no current data. She changed how those complaints were labeled. She prepared a public story about my emotional instability before the rollout failed. Together, they had created a system where every inconvenient fact was made smaller until it could be stepped over. Brittany asked to speak with me alone after the planning session, but our attorneys remained in adjoining rooms with the doors open. She stood beside the window, looking down at traffic moving through downtown Columbus. "If I vote to suspend them, will you tell the board Dad misled me?" she asked. "Yes." "And that Mom made me believe you were trying to sabotage my appointment?" "Yes." She turned. "Will you tell them I didn't understand the real defect?" "I will say the executive summary omitted critical information." "That isn't what I asked." "No, you did not understand the full defect." Some of the tension left her shoulders. Then I continued. "I will also say you knew the investigation was incomplete, did not read the underlying report, and signed the warehouse order because you wanted to prove you could overrule me." The relief disappeared. "So you won't protect me?" "I will tell the complete truth. You know they'll remove me." "They may. I could lose my career. You could have lost someone else's life." Her face tightened. "You think I don't wake up knowing that?" "I think waking up with guilt is not the same as accepting responsibility in the room where it costs you something." She walked to the table and pressed both hands against it. "I called you because I thought you would know how to save this. I do know how to help save it. Not the company, me." There it was. The request beneath every other request. "I can stand beside you," I said. "I will not stand between you and what you did." Tears filled her eyes, but she did not turn away. "You did it before," she said. "I know. The prototype. The reports you fixed. Every time Dad came after me." "Yes. And now, when I actually need you, you decide to stop." "I decided to stop because you actually need to become someone who can survive without another person carrying your consequences. That sounds very noble when you are not the one losing everything. I lost my job, my name inside the company, and most of the people I thought trusted me. You still have the truth. So do you." She looked toward the closed door behind which her attorney waited. "I hate you a little for making me do this. I can live with that." My parents called her that evening. Brittany asked me to remain on the line with my phone muted. Her attorney listened too. Gerald began without asking how she was. "You will not attend tomorrow's evaluation," he said. "I'm the CEO. You are a witness whose judgment is under review. Your presence gives Rachel legitimacy. Carebridge required me to attend. Carebridge does not control this family." "No," Brittany said. "It controls the contract. My mother took over. Your father is trying to protect the factory from the bank. If we surrender operational control, the lender will own us." That was not accurate. The lender had temporary consent rights because pledged shares and a compliance default gave it leverage during forbearance negotiations. It could not simply take the factory the next morning. Gerald knew the difference. He preferred the frightening version. "Rachel has convinced you that voting against us will make you independent." Marilyn continued. "It will make you her instrument." Brittany looked across the room at me. I kept my face still. Gerald said, "The investor directors do not care about this family. Once they remove us, they will sell the company in pieces. You will lose your position, your husband will spend the first month of marriage watching you become a public failure, and Rachel will walk away pretending she saved everyone." "What do you want me to do?" Brittany asked. "Vote against the governance agreement. Support an internal correction managed by the current leadership. We will handle Carebridge afterward. And the testimony? You will state that you relied on company records and that the release decision was a reasonable executive action." "It wasn't. It was based on the information you had. I knew Rachel had not completed the investigation." My mother's voice sharpened. "Do not confuse guilt with truth." Brittany closed her eyes. Gerald gave her one final instruction. "You are our daughter before you are their witness." The call ended without Brittany answering. For several minutes, she remained seated with the phone in her lap. "Are you going to testify?" I asked. "Yes." "Are you going to vote?" She looked at the draft governance agreement on the table. "I don't know." I did not press her. At 11:43 that night, a message appeared on my phone. "I will testify. I still don't know how I'll vote." I opened the board diagram attached to the morning agenda. 5 seats, 2 votes controlled by my father, 2 votes supporting the independent plan, 1 seat belonging to the sister who had fired me to prove she was no longer under my authority. By noon the next day, the independent laboratory would demonstrate what the green light had hidden. The lender would decide whether to grant forbearance. CareBridge would decide whether the $100 million agreement still had a future. But the evidence alone could not remove the people who had buried it. That required Brittany to choose whether being their daughter still mattered more than becoming accountable for what she had done. On May 13th, I walked into the largest quality review Whitmore Remote Care had ever held. The room was beside the independent testing suite, not inside a courtroom, but nearly everyone entered, as if a verdict were waiting for them. The 5 board members sat at the front table. CareBridge occupied one side of the room with Elias, Clinical Safety Counsel, and 2 contract representatives. The lender had sent its restructuring advisor. Outside audit counsel sat between the board and the witnesses. Department heads from engineering, manufacturing, customer support, finance, and regulatory affairs filled the remaining seats. Dana sat beside her attorney near the testing room window. Brittany sat in the CEO's chair. My parents sat together. Gerald wore the same dark suit he used for investor presentations. Marilyn had arranged a foundation pin against her jacket. They looked united, composed, and offended that anyone had required them to explain themselves inside the company they believed belonged to them. Elias opened the session. "This review has 3 purposes," he said. "To determine whether the reported malfunction can be reproduced, to identify how affected inventory was released, and to decide whether Whitmore Remote Care has the structure and resources to complete a credible correction." Gerald immediately asked to speak. "No patient has died," he said. "One individual was hospitalized and recovered. The alleged defect appears only under an unusual combination of heat and backup power. We are allowing a limited technical condition to threaten more than 200 jobs and a contract that could expand remote care across the country." Marilyn followed him. "Our family foundation has spent years helping older Americans remain safely in their homes. Destroying the company will not protect those people. It will eliminate a product many of them depend on." She looked toward the employees in the room. "Some people discussing this issue have salaries, lawyers, and outside opportunities. Many of our workers do not. My mother's argument was designed to make every challenge to her authority sound like an attack on employees." I did not respond. The testing protocol had already been approved by the independent lab, CareBridge, and outside counsel. The equipment would answer before I did. Behind the glass, technicians placed 3 PulseSure units inside the thermal chamber. One was the demonstration unit recovered from the foundation warehouse. The other 2 came directly from retained inventory under documented chain of custody. The chamber temperature rose according to the validation protocol. Each unit continued transmitting normal clinical readings to a simulated CareBridge dashboard. Then the technicians switched them to backup power. For several minutes, nothing changed. Green indicators remained lit on all 3 devices. The dashboard continued showing live readings. Gerald folded his arms. Then the first clinical data stream stopped. The second stopped 17 seconds later. The third stopped after another 23 seconds. On a separate diagnostic display, the devices continued sending Keep Alive packets. The central server received those packets and reset the missing data timer each time. The units appeared connected. No current heart rate readings were arriving. No offline alert appeared. The local lights remained green. The room became so quiet I could hear the ventilation fan inside the test chamber. Elias asked Dana, "Would a patient looking at the current device know that clinical data had stopped?" "No," she said. "Would the monitoring center know?" "Not from the normal dashboard. The Keep Alive packets prevent the current alarm logic from identifying the connection as lost." "Could the system continue like that for hours?" "Yes." Gerald leaned toward the microphone. "This is a controlled laboratory condition." Elias looked at him. The hospitalized patient experienced a power interruption and elevated indoor temperature. The demonstration unit experienced heat exposure in a closed vehicle before switching to backup power at the wedding. The condition is reproducible and foreseeable. My father glanced toward me. He had wanted the defect to remain theoretical. Now it was glowing green behind glass. Outside counsel moved to the control history. I presented the quarantine order entered on April 18th. The corrective action number, the request for regulatory review, and the notices sent to Gerald, operations, regulatory counsel, and the audit committee. The record showed that I had blocked shipment before leaving for the wedding. Next came the termination notice issued that evening. Then the digital release created under my name at 8:47. The wedding photograph appeared on the screen. My badge lay beside Brittany's champagne. In the background, she held the microphone she had used to fire me. The venue camera confirmed I remained at the reception when the approval was created. My personal devices showed no connection to the Whitmore network. No remote authentication request had reached my phone or laptop. Martinvale took the witness seat. He confirmed that my digital certificate had been disabled after my termination, then restored through an administrator account on Monday morning. Why? Outside counsel asked. Mr. Whitmore requested continuity of executive approvals, Martin said. Did he tell you Rachel Whitmore had expressly refused to approve the PulseSure release? No. Where did the restoration request originate? The computer assigned to Gerald Whitmore's executive office. My father spoke before anyone asked him. I instructed it to maintain continuity during a leadership transition. I did not instruct anyone to falsify a document. The statement was narrower than every version he had offered before. It no longer claimed I had signed. It no longer claimed the certificate had remained active. It admitted he had created the access that made the false approval possible. Outside counsel displayed the supplier email next. Months earlier, the component manufacturer had warned that the replacement communications module had a lower validated temperature range than the original part. Their engineer recommended additional testing before using it in home monitoring devices expected to operate during power interruptions. Gerald's reply appeared beneath it. We can complete broader validation after launch. Missing this production window creates a greater business risk than the theoretical thermal concern. One of the investor directors looked at him. You knew expanded testing was recommended. I knew a supplier wanted to protect itself. You chose to delay testing until after launch. I chose to keep the company on schedule. The shortened executive summary followed. My original report described the loss of current clinical data, the continuing status packets, the failed offline alarm, and the green indicator. The version sent to Brittany reduced all of it to a temporary communications interruption under extreme environmental conditions. Paige Mercer's statement confirmed Gerald had directed which language to remove. Brittany stared at the two summaries side by side. She had seen them before, but seeing them projected in front of the board made her reliance on the shorter version impossible to hide behind private confusion. Then Teresa Alvarez's email chain appeared. Marilyn had instructed customer service not to use the phrases missed alert, transmission failure, or device malfunction without executive review. Complaints describing a green light with no current readings had been labeled as setup or connectivity issues. Marilyn lifted her chin. We were preventing unqualified staff from making clinical conclusions. You also prevented quality from seeing the pattern, Elias said. That was not my intention. The next document was the contingency communications draft, created before the wedding. It described me as emotionally unstable after being denied the CEO role. It said I had withheld information, abandoned validation, and left voluntarily. Marilyn's comments instructed the communications team to use wedding photographs to establish motive and avoid technical language. My mother did not deny writing them. We prepared for reputational risk, she said. A company cannot wait until a crisis becomes public to decide how it will communicate. You prepared a false explanation before the release occurred. One investor director replied. We prepared a possible explanation based on Rachel's history of conflict with leadership. The room shifted then. Until that moment, my parents had argued that individual decisions were misunderstood. The component email was business judgment. The shortened summary was simplification. The complaint labels were communications discipline. The restored certificate was administrative continuity. The draft connected those choices. Before they knew whether the release would succeed, they had prepared to make me responsible if it failed. Gerald rested both hands on the table. Yes, we made difficult decisions, he said. We made them because this company employs people who cannot afford ideological purity. We were days from the largest expansion in our history. Rachel saw one risk. We had to see all of them. I answered him for the first time that morning. You did not choose between patient safety and employee jobs. You chose between losing control and making other people carry the risk for you. He looked toward the employees. Tell that to them when the bank closes the line. The lender's advisor spoke calmly. The bank has not decided to close the line. It has offered temporary forbearance if the board accepts independent governance and a funded correction plan. Gerald's expression changed. The employees he had placed between himself and accountability no longer supported his version of the choice. Outside counsel called Brittany. She moved from the CEO's chair to the witness table. Her attorney sat behind her, but the answers were hers. "Did you authorize the warehouse to resume packaging?" outside counsel asked. "Yes." "Had you reviewed the complete validation report?" "No." "Did you know the investigation was unfinished?" "Yes." "Why did you sign?" Brittany looked at Gerald, then at Marilyn. "Dad told me the quarantine was broader than necessary. He called opening the warehouse my first test as CEO. Mom told me Rachel was using the defect to undermine the succession. Were you forced to sign?" "No." "Did you understand the full malfunction?" "No. The summary I received omitted the most important details." "Why did you fire Rachel publicly?" The question seemed to take more from her than the others. "Because I wanted to hurt her," she said. "I wanted everyone to see that she could not overrule me anymore." No one moved. Brittany continued before outside counsel asked another question. "My parents gave me reasons to believe Rachel was trying to control me. I chose to believe them because it made the position feel earned. I signed an order I did not understand because I wanted to prove I had authority. That was my decision." Marilyn whispered. "Brittany, my sister did not look at her. I am resigning as CEO," she said. "The resignation will take effect after the board completes today's governance vote, so the 5th seat remains occupied." For the first time, she was not asking anyone to save her from the consequence attached to the truth. Elias placed the proposed term sheet before the board. CareBridge would continue the suspended agreement under a limited remediation structure if Whitmore accepted the conditions within 48 hours. Gerald and Marilyn would be suspended from all officer roles and operational authority. An independent safety committee would control product correction, complaint review, and regulatory communications. A restructuring officer acceptable to the investor directors and lender would hold temporary signing authority. The founder bonus and succession fee would remain unpaid, while compliance representations were investigated. Whistleblowers would receive formal protection. The lender would offer forbearance rather than accelerate the expansion loan, provided the governance agreement was signed and the correction fund established. The board vote began. The first investor director voted in favor. The second investor director voted in favor. Gerald voted against. The director aligned with him voted against. Brittany held the final vote. My father turned toward her. "Britt?" he said, using the childhood nickname I had not heard from him in years. "Whatever mistakes were made, we are still a family. Families do not hand each other over to strangers." Brittany looked at my mother. Marilyn's face remained composed, but her eyes carried the same instruction she had given us since childhood. Protect the family. Carry what we give you. Do not let outsiders see. Then Brittany looked at me. I did not nod. I did not smile. I did not ask her to choose me. This vote could not be another decision she made to win someone's approval. She turned back to the board. I vote in favor of the governance agreement and the immediate suspension of Gerald and Marilyn Whitmore from all officer and operational roles. The board secretary recorded the vote. 3-2. Gerald remained a director that day. So did Marilyn. Removing those seats required the follow-up forbearance and shareholder agreements. But their authority over employees, quality records, production, communications, and the CareBridge response ended immediately. The restructuring officer signed the preliminary term sheet before anyone left the room. The $100 million agreement was not restored in full. It remained suspended while the correction plan moved forward, but it had not been terminated. My father looked across the table at me. "Do you think you won?" "No," I said. "I think the company finally stopped asking everyone else to lose for you." He stood, but the security officer assigned by outside counsel stepped beside the conference room door. Gerald was not arrested. He was simply no longer permitted to walk back into the factory and continue issuing orders. That distinction seemed to wound him more deeply. After my parents left, the employees were dismissed, and the board remained. Brittany returned to the seat she had just resigned from long enough to sign the formal notice. Then one of the investor directors turned toward me. "The restructuring officer can manage the lender and contract documents," she said. "But the company still needs an operational leader employees trust. We would like to appoint you Interim Chief Executive Officer, effective today. The title hung in the room. 1 month earlier, my family had used that chair to declare me useless. Now the board was offering it back as proof that I had won. The title hung in the room longer than it should have. Interim Chief Executive Officer. 1 month earlier, my father had used the same position to declare that my sister was the future and I was the useless daughter who had held the company back. Now 2 investor directors were offering me that chair as if the symmetry itself made the decision obvious. I looked at the restructuring officer, Laura Benton. She already had authority to sign the CareBridge term sheet, negotiate with the lender, and manage the temporary governance structure. The contract did not depend on me accepting a crown. No, I said. One director frowned. Rachel, this is not ceremonial. The employees need stability. I agree. Then why refuse? Because this company just watched what happens when leadership is treated like a family inheritance. I am not going to repair that by accepting another appointment in the same room on the same day because my last name suddenly feels useful again. Brittany lowered her eyes. I continued. Laura can manage the restructuring. Begin an independent search for a permanent CEO. I will lead the safety and remediation program for a fixed term, with authority that reports to the independent committee rather than the founders or the CEO. You would take responsibility for the correction, but not the company, the director said. I would take responsibility for the work I am qualified to lead. That is different from taking every responsibility because people are frightened. Laura studied me for several seconds, then nodded. I can support that structure. The board approved my appointment as Chief Safety and Remediation Officer for 6 months. I received a seat on the Independent Safety Committee, but no automatic family seat on the board, and no authority over departments outside the correction plan. For the first time in my career, I accepted a role whose limits were written as clearly as its power. My parents were escorted to separate offices to collect personal belongings under supervision. They were not arrested. No one placed handcuffs on them or read dramatic charges in the hallway. Gerald was simply informed that he could no longer issue orders, enter controlled areas, contact employees about the investigation, or represent the company to CareBridge, the lender, or regulators. He had walked through that factory for nearly 30 years, believing every door opened because he had built the building. That afternoon, his badge stopped working. The immediate suspension removed him from his officer position, but it did not erase his shares or his board seat. Those consequences took another 48 hours and required documents my father had once assumed no one would force him to sign. The lender offered temporary forbearance instead of accelerating the expansion loan. In exchange, Gerald resigned as a director and granted a 12-month voting proxy over the pledged portion of his shares. The investor agreement prevented him from replacing the independent directors or reversing the governance changes while the company remained under remediation. He still owned stock. He no longer controlled what the stock allowed him to command. The $2.4 million founder performance bonus was withheld because the CareBridge milestone had not been completed and the required compliance representations were under investigation. The $1.2 million succession fee was also suspended. Neither amount had fully vested, and the agreements contained clawback provisions tied to concealed material risks. My father called it theft. His attorney called it enforcement of the contracts he had signed. Marilyn's consequences were quieter, but I knew they cut deeper. The board suspended her officer role and removed her authority over communications. She could no longer approve customer notices, complaint language, regulatory statements, or employee messaging related to PulseSure. The Whitmore Family Foundation held an emergency meeting and placed her on leave. Within a week, the foundation announced an independent audit and removed the family name from its largest remote care program. The photographs of my mother beside patients remained online for several days, then disappeared one campaign at a time. For years, Marilyn had controlled our family by controlling the words used to describe it. Anger became concern. Obedience became loyalty. Silence became protection. Now every public statement passed through regulatory counsel, independent quality review, and CareBridge approval. The correction notice used the phrases she had forbidden customer service to say: loss of clinical data transmission, false connected status, potential missed alert. No one allowed her to replace them with softer language. 3 days after the vote, my parents asked to meet me at outside counsel's office. I agreed because lawyers would be present and because I wanted the boundary stated where no one could later revise it. Gerald looked older than he had at the board meeting. Not broken, but displaced. After everything we built for you, he said, this is how you repay us. You built a company. We built your career. You gave me work. I earned the career. His jaw tightened. You took control of the company from your own father. I refused control. That is the part you still do not understand. You used strangers to strip us of our rights. The lender enforced its agreement. The board exercised its authority. CareBridge protected its patients. None of those people appeared because I invented them. Marilyn sat beside him with her hands folded over her purse. Are you cutting us out of your life? She asked. Today, I am ending your authority over my work. That is not what I asked. What happens to the family depends on what both of you do when you no longer have authority over me. Gerald leaned forward. You expect us to apologize while federal regulators and lawyers circle everything we own? I do not expect anything from you today. You should remember who made you. I stood and collected my notes. You built a company. You did not build my obedience into it. My mother's expression shifted, not into regret but disbelief. She had always assumed every boundary was the opening position of a negotiation. I left before either of them could turn the meeting into another debt I owed. Brittany submitted her formal resignation the same afternoon. She remained available to the audit committee, regulatory council, and the lender. Her attorney negotiated separate representation because her interests no longer matched our parents' or the company's. She did not return to sales. She did not keep an honorary executive title. She did not become a spokesperson for accountability. For several weeks, she answered questions. At the end of May, she asked to meet me at a small coffee shop near her apartment. Evan had returned to work, and their postponed honeymoon had been canceled indefinitely. I did not ask whether their marriage would survive. That was not mine to manage. Brittany arrived early. I'm sorry, she said after we sat down. Not because the contract froze, not because I lost the position. I'm sorry I used the wedding to hurt you. I waited. I'm sorry I signed without reading the full report, she continued. I'm sorry I believed Mom and Dad because their version made me feel important. I knew the investigation was unfinished and I opened the warehouse anyway. She did not say she had only been manipulated. That mattered. The apology does not erase the wedding, I said. It does not erase the release order or the risk to those patients. I know. It also does not require me to trust you again on the schedule that feels best to you. I know that too. Her eyes filled, but she did not ask me to comfort her. What do I do now? She asked. It was the kind of question she had asked me for most of our lives. This time, I gave her no plan. You make the right decision when no one is watching, when no one is praising you, and when it costs you something. Then you do it again. Will that be enough? I don't know. She nodded. We did not hug when we left. She touched my arm briefly, then stepped away. The door between us was no longer locked, but neither of us pretended it was open. By the time I began telling this story at the end of July, Whitmore Remote Care had a new permanent CEO chosen through an independent search. Laura was transferring authority in stages instead of disappearing after a ceremonial announcement. Dana had been promoted within the rebuilt quality organization. She now had direct access to the Independent Safety Committee and the right to report concerns outside the ordinary management chain. Regulatory Council had filed the required reports. The FDA review, civil claims, and governance investigation were still continuing. No honest person could say how all of them would end. Of the roughly 2,400 affected units, the first 600 assigned to high-risk patients had been repaired or replaced. CareBridge restored a limited pilot and released the first restricted payment, with a substantial reserve held for remediation. The $100 million contract had not magically returned. It had survived under conditions my parents could no longer override. One afternoon, I stood beside Dana and Caleb in the independent test lab while the revised PulseSure system entered its final pilot validation. The device had the replacement communications module. Caleb's firmware no longer treated a Keep Alive packet as proof that current clinical data was reaching the server. The chamber heated. The unit switched to backup power. Then the technicians interrupted the clinical data stream while allowing the status packets to continue. The light changed from green to yellow. An alert appeared on the central dashboard. Clinical data not confirmed. Connection status could no longer hide the missing readings. When transmission resumed and the center confirmed receipt of current data, the indicator returned to green. No one applauded. We checked the timestamps, verified the alarm, and repeated the test. That was what safety looked like. Not a speech, a title, or a family photograph. It was a system designed to admit when something had gone wrong. I did not tell this story because I needed everyone to know I had been right. I told it because my family had spent years teaching me that things were safe as long as they looked calm, that loyalty meant carrying another person's consequences, and that a green light mattered more than the connection behind it. For the first time, the green light did not mean everything looked fine. It meant someone had actually answered. You should never confuse loyalty with taking responsibility for someone else's dishonesty. When a family, employer, or leader asks you to ignore evidence, sign something untrue, or protect their reputation at your expense, slow down, document everything, seek advice, and refuse to carry consequences you did not create. Being intelligent is not about winning every argument. It is about protecting people, correcting mistakes, and choosing the lawful path even when it costs you approval. You can offer someone a chance to change without shielding them from accountability. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about courage, truth, and hard-earned justice.